Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. I am very excited to have my guest Ben Urwand is with us. Thank you for being here, Ben.
No, thanks, Dan. Great to be here.
We're going to talk about college essays, which
hmm
is your specialty. What do you do?
Well, that's pretty much what I focus on. There are people who do the whole college application process and think about strategy and what schools to apply to. But the essay itself is really, really challenging for students because it's the first time they've ever written a personal essay in their lives. High school students are suddenly, they're applying to college. It's stakes could not be higher. They're being told this is going to affect the rest of their lives. And they have to write a personal essay, which is totally different from all the kinds of analytical essays that they've written in high school. I think writing is stressful for most people at the best of times. And a lot of people have trouble procrastinating and overthinking and perfecting. But I think specifically for the college essay, technology has made it harder in that there are so many blogs and so many posts on how to write a college essay. And there are so many examples of a successful college essay. But I put that in quotes because I think I've always felt that the absolute worst thing students can do if they want to write an authentic, effective college essay is read what other people have written. Nothing could stress them out more because first, often the advice or what they end up reading is not actually good. That happens all the time. And then they question themselves. And second, they end up trying to sound like other people when the whole point of the college essay is to sound like yourself and work out what your personal story is. It used to be there'd be a couple of books out there. You could buy a book like Essays That Worked. But now every student is Googling, what's an example of a successful college essay? And then copying that. Big mistake. First, number one rule, if you want to write a good college essay, don't look at what other people have written in their college essays.
And why not?
First, you'll often see, the essay that got someone into Harvard, and everyone will read it, and it'll be some kind of gimmicky essay that everyone remembers. 9 times out of 10, that essay didn't get the person into Harvard. The person got into Harvard because they had a perfect SAT, a great GPA, list of extracurriculars, and they just happened to write this essay that people remember. But that isn't the kind of essay that is getting most people into good schools. To get into a good school, you have to write an essay that sounds reflective, mature, that responds to the questions. So many students come to me and they haven't even looked at the questions and they've already written an essay. They haven't even looked at the prompts. So they're missing the basics and everyone's buying into this narrative that you just have to say something really flashy, really gimmicky, really clever. And that might get the occasional student into college, but for the vast majority of students, they just need to write something authentic that sounds like they've really put thought into it. It's a very different approach. So the first problem with reading these examples of college essays is students are encouraged to write really gimmicky stuff that isn't helpful. But the other reason, which I think is probably even more important, and I think I was alluding to it earlier, is the whole point is you have to write about yourself and you have to try to find your own voice and tell your own story. If you read what other people are saying and you're thinking, oh, that's what got them in, then by definition, you're going to be trying to work out what you need to say and what you need to sound like to be more like these other essays you've written. And then you won't sound like yourself. You'll sound like everyone else. And you won't stand out because you'll sound like you're just trying to do what everyone else is trying to do, which is not good because the whole point is to work out what's distinctive about you. And that's a hard thing to do.
It is.
You need to think about yourself to do that. You don't need to think about other people to do that.
And I have the feeling young people are programmed to project a certain image of themselves. But is that the image that's going to be effective in a college essay?
Definitely not. I mean, I would say even before social media, it's a tough thing to do for anyone who's never written about themselves to write something, to think about themselves, because you don't do that in high school in the United States. You're not trained to write personal essays. Suddenly you have to write this all-important personal essay. And it's a very, very challenging thing to do just regardless. Like, how do you dig deep and work out what about your experience is worth talking about? And when I work with students, actually, especially at the beginning, you'd think we'd be just getting to the writing. But by far the hardest part of the process is the talking. because they're not used to talking about themselves. They're not used to thinking about what's distinctive about themselves. So I ask a lot of probing questions. They give me a lot of answers, and I push when I see something that might be worth, exploring. And eventually we always get there. Once you work that out, the writing actually flows pretty fast. But getting to that point is really hard for everyone.
Can you think of some examples of how you've brought a young person along?
I mean, I do have examples. Usually what I'll do at first is, the classic question is to talk about a setback or obstacle that you've encountered in life and how you worked through it and how it affected you and what you learned in the process. But that really only applies to about 30-40% maximum of students. The rest haven't had something like that. And it would be a mistake to try to act like they had, because they haven't. It's not authentic. But one that comes to mind, that's a good example of what I'm just saying, because it's relatively easy. If a student tells you they've suffered some really difficult set of circumstances and worked through it, obviously that's what you should write about, as long as they have stuff to say about it. And I had one student in the past few months where we were really hitting a wall, because he'd had a very comfortable upbringing and he didn't have any really challenging experiences. And we just started talking, and I said, well, what do you enjoy doing? And he said, he started to light up. He's like, I like watching movies. And the reason I like watching movies is because I'm a musician. I play violin in my orchestra, and I really am interested in soundtracks. And I like the old soundtracks, like Hitchcock stuff or whatever. But I really like recent movies because there are different themes for different characters. And I sometimes will go to a movie and close my eyes, and I'll be able to guess what's going on based on the themes that are being played. And then he's like, I actually don't really watch movies. I listen to them. And I said, that's the beginning of your essay, because that's a really unusual way of thinking. But then that led to a whole essay on how he sort of perceives things a bit differently from other people, not just with, starting with this example, but that led to this really interesting essay about his learning style and how he's a bit different.
Maybe it's important for us parents to approach our children like that in general, of allowing them to find themselves.
I think it's rare, just in that a lot of kids will tell me, no one's ever asked me those kinds of things, or I've never talked about this before. And I think why they're so responsive is because I'm showing them respect and just curiosity in their experience. But of course, that could be generalized, and
right.
who doesn't want to receive that kind, respect from parents, curiosity from their parents? I think it's harder for parents, because it's just, everyone has that problem. It's why therapy works, because you're talking to someone who is objective. You brought up the point of cliches, though, like packaging. I think that's probably the most important thing to bring up about college essays. Yeah. If there's one thing that distinguishes a good college essay from a bad college essay, does it veer into cliched territory, or does it seem to be someone making an honest statement about themselves that doesn't fall into, cliche? And students will come to me, for example, like a classic thing, especially very high achieving students will come to me of great SAT, great GPA, great extracurriculars. And they'll tell me about this one experience that was difficult, and they'll describe it. And then they'll say, but what I realized at the end was that it actually made me stronger to have gone through this experience. And I came out stronger, and I'm actually glad it happened. And what I'll say at that point is, that is a cliche. Everyone wants to say that. So are you willing, after all of this work you put into your application, to reduce your life to a cliche? Make that your college application. And then I'll say, is it true? Are you really glad it happened? And inevitably they'll say, not really. Really hard. And I'm like, well, that's more interesting. Let's push that a bit. So avoiding cliche at all costs, but it's very hard. And everyone, from the brightest students to the students who have more challenges, will all veer into cliche. And I'm sort of see it as my job is to push them away from that. And parents, right? You said that parents will push kids to do that. And that is a weird phenomenon. I have to think about that a bit more. I almost think maybe parents are worried their kids are scared they won't fit in or something. But but it's bad advice to push your child to just fit into a cliche in their college essay.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's just that tendency in general to, yeah, want their kids to fit in and be safe,
Mhm.
and so don't stand out, which might not be helpful in this case.
In this case, I mean, yeah, sure. In other
Writing an
cases,
essay.
yeah. In this case, the whole point is if you want to do well in the college essay, the equivalent of getting a perfect SAT, well, you have to stand out. You can't just sound like everyone else, because then you won't get, a good score in terms of the college essay.
It sounds like really good work because you're going at it with curiosity and
Mhm.
non-judgment and helping them develop a really important skill, and it sounds like maybe learn about themselves.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love the work. It's fascinating. Every single student is so interesting. And I think they find the process interesting. It's very, very gratifying to me to do this. Another thing, though, is I will be very blunt if the essay isn't up to scratch, or
Mhm.
if it is cliched. If, like, sometimes students will come to me, with nothing prepared, and I prefer that, because then we get to brainstorm together. But especially right now, a lot of people come to me with something prepared, and it is cliched, and there is a deadline. And in that situation, unless we're really on the deadline, in which case there's nothing I can do. But even if there's 10 days, I see it as my role to be totally honest with them and tell them, this is not working. We
Mhm.
need to reconceive this. Maybe we can salvage something, but I will tell them this essay is totally cliched. But if they present me with a cliched essay and there's time,
Mhm.
then I feel it's my response. They've come to me. I'm the last person before it goes to an admissions officer, and I will say, I really don't think this essay is working. We
Mhm.
need to buckle down and change this. And one good aspect of my job is, in other teaching situations, you have to be really, really delicate,
Uh-huh.
because people might get offended. But in this situation, everyone appreciates it because they know it's helpful for their application, and
Uh-huh.
they're willing to take that kind of criticism in this situation.
I wonder if it's helpful to look at it like, imagine an admissions office that is burnt out, tired, looking at your essay, it's the 20th one that day.
Mhm.
Something cliched or amateurish is immediately just gonna, ugh,
Mhm.
could get thrown in the wrong pile.
Oh, definitely. And the other thing that will get thrown in the wrong pile, although people don't realize it, is trying to be really hooky and different and
Mhm.
not actually saying anything, just like trying to say something a bit different for the sake of it being different. They see a lot of that too.
Can you think of an example of that?
Yeah, I had one yesterday with a student where the question was, this was a supplemental essay, because you write the Common App main essay, which is the more personal essay that goes to all the schools. And then you write supplemental essays for individual schools. And the supplemental question was, why do you want to study at this university? And please outline your major and how you will take advantage of our school to pursue your studies and your career and beyond. It's a very direct, very simple question.
Mhm.
And this student began with 2 lines of dialogue that had nothing to do with the question whatsoever. And it was like, maybe we can study chip science, I said, laughing. My friend responded, that's a perfect example of trying to get the reader's attention, but you're not saying anything responding to the question.
Mhm.
In fact, it's a bit insulting to the
Yeah,
admissions.
maybe disrespectful to the question.
It's disrespectful to the question. And and a lot of people, and I think it's terrible advice, tell students to write like that to capture their attention.
Uh-huh.
But
Yeah.
it would be infinitely better just to respond. I mean, you could add a little creativity to it. You could
Uh-huh.
respond. You certainly can answer that question in a way that's distinctive. But it's better even just to blandly just say, I want to study mechanical engineering because I want to. Even that is infinitely better than beginning with 2 lines of dialogue.
Have you ever noticed an example that was risky, but you were like, that's clever. Maybe go for it.
Oh, definitely. I mean, the way that works is if you tell a story that responds effectively to the question. So I can give you an example of that. A student this year is half Jewish, half African American, and the question is about diversity. Which is a classic question. A lot of supplementals are about diversity and experience with diversity. And he didn't really identify as Jewish in his school because he was half African American. He just didn't go to the Jewish club in his school. And he started telling this story about how he met another girl at his school who was half Korean American, half Jewish. And they bonded. And she did go to this club and she encouraged him to go. And then they both went and they both created new awareness of different ways to be Jewish within that club. And that's a really interesting story. You see, but everything in this student's story, it seemed like it was complicated, but everything did relate to diversity, and he was capturing his complicated experience. So that was very clever and effective and responded to the question. But if it has some gimmicky, that, it's possible you might get an admissions officer who appreciates it, but I'm pretty sure that 9 times out of 10, that is not going to go down well.
Right.
It is about respecting the question. And again, the Common App has 6 questions you can pick from, and then an optional make up your own, which I never recommend. But if you look at the questions, they're just refreshingly honest attempts to get you to talk about yourself. There's no tricks. And if you respond in this very tricky way, it isn't showing respect to the question.
Do you ever get into helping kids get into a flow of, for instance, writing drafts as opposed to perfectionistically go sentence by sentence?
Absolutely. So I will tell students, first we'll be talking, because you can't write anything unless you know what the point is. But then when I feel like we're getting somewhere, I will tell them, go off on your own, try to write your thoughts down. And I want it to be bad. I don't want it to be good. Just get out your thoughts. It can be like journaling. This is not your college essay. This is just getting out some ideas on the page. Because if you think it's your college essay and you sit down and write,
right,
that's incredibly stressful. If it's just, let's explore, we've had this interesting conversation, sit down, try to write what you've been telling me, and see what comes out, and write as much as you want. Just get your thoughts on the page, and then we'll talk about it next week. That normally goes pretty well. They usually will say, thank you for telling me that it can be bad, because every time I sit down to write, I think it has to be really good, and I overthink each sentence. So I will do that. And then the other thing I'll do is I will try to break the essay down into 5 or 6 questions. And I'll give them 5 or 6 prompts that lead them through what they have been telling me. And so it's not just one big prompt. It's like, can you answer this? Can you answer that? And that seems to break it down pretty well so that they get words down on the page. Then it becomes, as you progress, you become more and more careful about every sentence, but you can't start out doing that, because then you'll never get it. Yeah.
Right. So you work your way up to that.
You work your way up to that. And by the end of the process, yeah, we're getting really obsessive about, a comma somewhere. But by that stage, you feel so confident about what you've done that it's not stressful to do that anymore. Right. And that part is really easy, honestly. It might be a little finicky sometimes, but it's easy compared to working out what you even want to talk about.
What's it like for a young person when they get through this and create this great piece of writing with you?
I mean, I see a lot of students who feel really proud of what they've done. And they're like, I never thought I was going to be able to do this. Yeah. I never thought I would be able to put my own story. They'll often say, it's weird. This actually feels like me. Like one student said to me yesterday, he said, out of 1,000 essays, if a friend of mine picked that up, they'd say, yeah, that's Will. That's him. So I think
that's what we're after.
Yeah, I think so. Because you can't control these people reading these essays are still individuals. So someone could be having a bad day. You know, you never know what kind of prejudices people bring. They're still just human beings. So I'll always tell students, don't strategize about what other people want to hear. You'll work yourself into just anxiety and it won't work. If you can be authentic and if you can submit what you know is your experience, that's the best you can hope for.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's something you can do if you work hard enough. But no one could ever anticipate what some reader is going to be thinking when they read that essay. Anything is possible.
And and that's so central to self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
If you just present yourself as good enough,
Mm-hmm.
just take the time and the work to do something you're proud of, and
Yeah.
then maybe let it go.
Yeah. But if you can accept that that's not possible, you can't be someone else, you can only be yourself, then the anxiety goes away. It's still really hard work, don't get me
Yeah.
wrong. But the students I think have the most problems are the ones who are sort of doubting whether that's still the right thing to do. And maybe they themselves aren't good enough and they need to take some other approach. And that's it's such a cynical
Mm.
approach to take that you're going to college and you need to strategize to that extent that when they ask you, can you be yourself for a moment? You're like, oh, I better not be myself.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
and and I find that it's very rare. I think I've only had one student where he was basically really cynical and sort of saying, well, of course, they're only going to read these for 30 seconds. And so I just have to put in some cliches because even though that's not true, that's what the best strategy here. And I just don't think I don't think that's true, but I think it's sad that someone would think, I'm not good enough to put myself on the page.
How about writer's block?
I don't believe in writer's block. I mean, you can get extremely tired. You can lose discipline in writing. When students say to me, I have writer's block, I mean, every time I'll just ask a question or push them in a different direction, and then they'll be writing like 5 minutes later. I have had students, I used to work with a lot of students with ADHD, and that was more of a challenge in terms of getting words on the page.
Mhm.
Even they did get words on the page, but there were different kinds of challenges, but that was not writer's block.
Right. You can be, maybe you can be tired, or you can need a break, or you could be anxious,
Yeah.
but there's always something you can be doing to move forward.
You just need someone to sort of help you reconceptualize it or to push you to do a different exercise or to run around the block and come back,
Uh-huh.
take a break. Or I have a whole bunch of exercises for that. I sometimes will set a timer and I'll say, okay, you've got 4 minutes.
Mhm.
You can write whatever you want, but you just have to write. And after 4 minutes, you can't write anymore. That always seems to get certain groups of students writing.
Uh-huh. So, how can parents find you?
So I've been doing this for a long time, but I've just in the past 6 months created a company called Real College Essays.
Mhm.
And the web address is just realcollegeessays.com. And that outlines my whole philosophy, methodology, approach to this. And there's a phone number there, there's an email there, so they can contact me pretty easily. And it seems to be growing pretty fast. I have noticed this season has been exponential.
Right.
I think people are taking the essay more seriously than before. This year compared to last year, there's no comparison.
It sounds like it's um, skills that a teenager is going to use beyond their college admission.
Yes, I think that's true. I think that's true. And I mean, hopefully for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
Um, the narrative itself is important. I know people who use the same narrative for college as for medical school, and they just,
Uh-huh.
once they discovered it, they used it. But I think the writing is important because you're going to be writing all through college. And I think you make a really good point that the self-esteem is important. If you put your signature down, if you're like, this is me and I'm applying to
Mhm.
college, it's a really important moment in your life. If you apply and submit something authentic, you're going to get into certain places and you're going to feel like these places took me. They
Yeah.
didn't take someone else.
Right.
And that's a really good way to begin your college and then career after that, rather than some cynical strategizing way, which just
Yeah.
doesn't.
Sort of like I fooled them
Yeah.
and now I'm a fraud.
Yeah, exactly. I really hope that these students that I've helped will take that lesson with them and will feel like they were able to just be themselves, put themselves out there, and continue to do that later on. What I hear from students as they're doing the essay makes me optimistic, because they do recognize that they had different impulses going in, but after going through this process, they feel like they have put themselves out there and they're ready to go forward doing that. So,
realcollegeessays.com.
yep.
Ben Urwand, thank you so much for being on the podcast. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I had a great time.